We have a bunch of code in this Discover Book screen that's already laid out for us. We have a handle search submit that's being passed as an onSubmit handler for this form, where we have that input to search books. And the first thing that I always want to do when I'm doing form submission handling is I need to take this event and prevent the default behavior. So we're going to say prevent default. And before I save this, I'm going to come over here and show you why I need to do this. So if I say Zach and hit enter, then I actually get a full page refresh. And if we look at the URL, we're going to see a question mark right there. And that's because the default behavior of forms is to make a post request to the current URL with the data of the form. That's not exactly what we're looking for here. So I'm going to get rid of that question mark here. And we're going to prevent default. I'll save that. And now if I search for Zach, I'm not going to get a full page refresh. And now I can deal with that input from the user. So what do I do with this input from the user? Well, I need to set that into some state. So I'm going to come up here. We're going to use state, and we're going to call this the query. We'll call this set query. And we're going to need to bring in React for this, React from React. And then down here, I'll call set query with event target. This is going to be my form elements. That's all the elements of my form. And then I'm going to grab the input search from its ID. So we're going to say elements.search. And then I'm going to get the value of that input, set that as my query. So then I can come up here and let's just console log query just to make sure that that's working. We'll pull up our DevTools. I'll search for Zach. And there we go. We have Zach. If I change this to lion, then we're going to get lion with two eyes because apparently I have a happy finger. So now that we've got our query, we can do a side effect with that query to actually make this request. So I'm going to say React use effect, and then I'm going to actually make the request. So we'll say window.fetch. We'll say process env React app API URL /books for the books endpoint. And then we need to attach our query onto this. And we could just say, put that query in there directly, but if the user added spaces or anything, that could mess this up. So we're going to use encode URI component, and we'll pass the query to that so that it is properly serialized for this URL that we're generating. Great, but we don't actually want to do this every single time our component renders. It could render for various reasons. So we're going to add a dependency list here, and we're going to put our query into that dependency list. So great. Then we can take that response and let's go ahead and console.log that response and save that. Come over here and I type in, oh, hold on a second. Look, I've got a response there already. What happened? Oh, that's right. So remember, use effect actually will run the callback immediately. And so I'm going to need another bit of state just to say, hey, I don't actually want to make this query. The user hasn't actually searched anything. They haven't queried yet. So I'm going to have some state for queried, set queried. And I could actually just say, hey, if the query is an empty string or if it's falsy or something, then don't bother doing the search. But the user actually can make an empty string query. So we're going to go ahead and have this queried state to maintain that. So we're going to initialize this to false. We'll initialize the query to an empty string as well. And then down here, we'll say set queried is true. And then I can say if not queried, then we'll return. So, and then we'll also need to update our dependency array. So now if we take a look at this, we're not going to get that log, and we can search for a author. And now we have a response. That response has OK is true, so we know that the request was successful. Now we just need to get the JSON response. So let's say response.json, and then we'll get the response data. And let's console.log the response data. Save that. We'll look for Zach's book. And there we go. We've got the book right there. Perfect. We just need to set this into some state. And we've got a variable here all ready for us to set it into some state. So we're going to say data and set data. We'll initialize this to null like it is currently. And then down here, we can say set data to that response data. And let's make sure that this is going to be the exact same. So what we get back is an object that has a books property. So let's come down here and see we have data.books. Perfect, that's exactly what we've got. So let's save this and see if this worked out. Go for Zach, let's get Zach's book. And no, that did not work out. So we're making the request, we're getting the books back, but we're not rendering anything. Let's take a look at what's going on. Yes, right here. So we have some status booleans here where we have is loading and is success, and we want to have is loading for a loading spinner and is success for knowing when we should actually show the data that we loaded. So let's make a status state here. So use state, status, set status. We'll initialize this to idle, and then is loading will be status is loading, and is success will be status is success. And then right here, before we make this request, we'll set the status to loading. And then once we've successfully gotten the data, we can set the status to success. Now we'll save that. We'll search for Zach's book. And there we had that loading spinner. We've got the book right here. Things are working awesome. I can search for Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe. And there it is. Awesome. So in review, what we did here so far is we created 4 elements of state. One for the status of the search, one for the actual query that the user entered, one for us to know whether the user has actually entered a query yet, and one to store the data. Then we derive is loading and is success based on that status value. And then we have a use effect for whenever the queried or query values change. If we haven't queried yet, then we just return, we don't bother. Otherwise, we're going to start loading. We make this fetch request to this endpoint right here. We make sure that we encode the URI component of query so that if the user enters any spaces or anything, it doesn't break the URL that we're generating here. And once that promise resolves, we're going to get a response object. We want to get the JSON off of that response object, so we call response.json and return that value. When that promise resolves, then we're going to get the response data, which we set into our React state, and then we update our status to be success so that we can successfully render that response data. And then of course we updated the handle search submit so that we could grab the query that the user entered and also update our queried state so we know that we're okay to make this request.